Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this Global Corporate Venturing Next Wave webinar on the future of automotive venturing. I'm Tom Whitehouse. I am the CEO of Leaf Capital, and we are a London-based investment bank. That's London, UK investment bank focused on early and growth stage energy and transport. Thank you very much for joining us. Looking forward to this hour-long conversation. Thank you to Global Corporate Venturing for inviting me to moderate this conversation. I'm a contributing editor there. I've been working with Tony Canestra on a series of discussions, mostly actually at in real life events over the last 6 or 7 years or so, but this is the first one we've done on automotive for a while. It's a theme we'll pick up again in real life at the next GCV symposium in London here in June, more of which later. And in preparation, I've been reflecting on a few things that have changed over the last few years, and some of the things that haven't, some of the promises that haven't been fulfilled, shall we say, and some that have. And that's essentially what I think we'll be looking at today. It's a very broad topic. We're going to keep it quite focused, and that focus will be determined by the two portfolio companies that Tony will be introducing, Quadric and RideCell. So, as I say, thank you to GCV. Thank you in particular also to Tony for your time and for Denso Ventures' support for Global Corporate Venturing and its automotive program over the years. Thank you very much, Virban and Arjav, for the time you've given today. Rest assured, people who are viewing and listening, that we won't be killing you with a PowerPoint. This is going to be a purely discussion-based webinar, and you'll see the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to post some questions there, which we'll endeavour to answer in the next hour or so. But let's get things started. So quick introduction to Denso, one of those companies that doesn't really need an introduction, but nevertheless, it's a tier one automotive manufacturing business. Tony's led their venturing efforts from the outset, I think over the last 6 years or more. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, Tony. But what I thought would be an interesting question, just to sort of get the ball rolling, was for you to tell us sort of how your role has changed. You know, if your kind of job description has perhaps changed over the last 6 years, or if indeed it's remained the same. You know, what are you looking for now? What sort of investments are you looking to make, and how has that changed?
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and thank you everyone for joining, and hopefully you can drive some value from this discussion and help you consider how to move forward with investing in the automotive and mobility spaces. So I've been the Director of Corporate Ventures at Denso for more than 10 years now, running the CVC group, with dual roles. Main focus, probably 90% of it, is on finding unique startups around the world that are strategically important to what Denso is trying to accomplish, and then selecting a few that we can invest in and support on their journey. And then the other 10% is we've actually acquired startups in the past, and that's something that we consider I wouldn't say on a regular basis, but it's certainly part of what my group is responsible for proposing as part of Denso's strategic directions forward. I would say, in answer to your question, my role probably hasn't changed much. In some ways, because of the longevity and the amount of investments that we've done, it's expanded in that it touches all aspects of Denso Corporation now. I get requests from different countries in Europe. I get requests from India, our operations there. I get outreach from Denso Asia. These are all things that within, I would say, the first 4 or 5 years of our existence didn't happen. But I think what we've done that has changed how we operate a bit is we've sort of been able to weave ourselves into the fabric of how Denso operates, and external innovation now is a known quantity, right? It's a known entity within all aspects of Denso globally, not just confined to certain parts of the R&D department like it was when we started. I think the other thing that's kind of interesting that as another proof point there is when we do implement new strategic directions that come from our upper management team, those are immediately fed down to us with a request that, okay, can you start looking for startups in these areas? So for example, in June of last year, Denso announced some new 2030 strategic directions that included wellness, included digitalization, included circular economy. And so those are all areas that immediately get fed to us to help think about startups that are working in those areas that then Denso could take a look at and figure out maybe how to work with.
Great.
So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, so it sounds like your remit is broadening and becoming more strategic, or at least it's being updated by a refreshed strategy at the parent level. And you're busier, you're being asked questions of various different units. I know your team is growing, you're based in California. Most of your portfolio, correct me if I'm wrong, at the moment is US based. I know you've got a couple of investments also over here in Europe. Have you done any investments into Indian businesses or Asian businesses yet? Is that something?
We do. Yeah, we have not specifically from my group done things into Asia. We've looked at several in India, proposed several. I think there's 2 now that are fairly close. Usually when our investments are done into Asian countries, and for the most part, those Asian countries have been Japan, right, which is our home country. That typically is done by the headquarters team. So my mandate covers sort of the rest of the world. And so we've done stuff in Israel. We've done quite a few in Europe. I would say probably about 70% of our portfolios in North America.
Okay. So before we introduce RideCell and Quadric from your portfolio, can you speak a bit generally about what's been successful in venturing and what's been less successful in venturing for you? And that might be not just about the particular companies in your portfolio, but it might be about what types of relationships have worked with Denso, where there has been the development of a successful strategic relationship.
Well, that's in my mind, a bit of a loaded question, because as we discussed at many DCV events, it really ties into what is the corporate mandate for your CVC group. In our case, it's purely strategic. So we are on the far end of that spectrum of our model, our CVC model, and that we don't really care much about the financial return. It's not a driver for why we invest. So when you ask about success, well, our success is actually well demonstrated by these 2 portfolio companies, RideCell and Quadric, in that when we first discovered them, we thought that there are things here that we could help them with and we could learn a lot from and potentially work together on. And so those are sort of the 3 different strategic levers that we consider when we look at startups. And I think in the case of both RideCell and Quadric, and probably there's at least 8 or 9 other startups in our portfolio where we've derived a lot of strategic value from working with them. We hope that we've delivered to them strategic benefits, and we see a path forward with both of them and others now to work together to try to deliver a win-win for both the startup and for Denso.
Great. Okay, well, let's pick up on that. And what I'd like you to do now, Tony, is actually introduce, let's start with you, Arjav. So tell us a little bit about the strategic rationale behind your investment in RideCell and what Denso is up to there.
Well, certainly. So we've been working with Arjav and RideCell now for more than 5 years. We were really interested in the area that we called new mobility. So how things were evolving in areas that were not really core to what we do as an auto supplier, right, as a parts supplier. But we could definitely see the industry moving towards those directions where you're going to have large fleets of vehicles that are going to need to be connected in certain ways. So it brought in lots of different technologies that we thought were very interesting into a new business model that there was no way we thought we could pursue. But in partnership with RideCell, could figure out where there are strategic points of intersection and where we could add value. And so it's been a great journey with RideCell, and I think he's actually done a great job of attracting numerous other strategic investors as well to the pool of the syndicate that supports RideCell going forward.
Great. So Arjav, that's your cue. Please, if you don't mind, introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your business. I had a quick look at the website and did a little bit of research on you before this meeting, obviously. You established in 2006, correct me if I'm wrong. So I don't know if we can still describe you as
2009.
2009, sorry.
2009. That's okay.
So you're a, shall we say, a relatively mature startup, and you've probably seen quite a lot. Well, you certainly have, if you've been in the automotive industry over that period. I'm curious as to how your technology offering has evolved and how the business model has evolved. But let's just start with the introduction to yourself and to RideCell, please.
So we're a mobility and automation platform, now used by the largest fleet in Europe, the largest commercial fleet in the United States, the largest city in the United States. And what we essentially help these large fleet-based organizations increase their utilization, sustainability, safety. We've evolved, certainly. And as Tony alludes to, it used to be that 5 years ago, the only fleets that were sort of, adopting technology sort of throughout the entire stack were, shared fleets. And some early adopters like Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I see Bob Wetzel is on the call. But I think that it really wasn't a situation where the largest fleets in the world really were in an ecosystem where they could adopt connected vehicle technology and make use of it. And I think that as the world has evolved, particularly over the last 3 to 4 years, all of the connectivity that these companies invested in has become much more important to use. And RideCell has, we very consciously built a strategy because we realized early on that if in order for us to really make the largest, changes or have the largest fleets in the world run their business better, it's not something that a small company or even a large company in Silicon Valley can do by itself. So as Tony mentions, we have, Denso, we have 2 OEMs, 2 insurance companies, 2 banks, as strategic investors. And through them, Denso being a great example, we have been able to build these alliances where we are able to, to make some usually impactful changes. So one of the things I'm most proud of this year is that a large, e-commerce fleet who is working with us has estimated they can save 170,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions, reduce them through technology that Denso and RideCell developed together. And that really isn't available on the market today. So I think going back to sort of finding that overlap, I think a lot of startups may look at strategic investors as simply financial investors, but I think, and we hope to provide a great return to Tony and all of our investors. But I think the value that strategic investors can bring is if you can find that unique sort of overlap and find the right organization within each investor who can partner with you.
Okay. Could you tell us a bit more about your customers and about, in particular, about your value proposition to them? You've already raised one value proposition there around sustainability, but I'm imagining that is accompanied by the cost reductions and efficiencies. But yeah, if we could get a bit more of a sense of the relationship you have with customers and what type of customers you have.
Certainly. So I think two customers I can talk about, are Arval, which is owned by BNP Paribas, about 1.6 million vehicles in Europe, probably the second largest, largest by some measures, leasing company in Europe. Penske Leasing, Penske Trucks is a customer of ours. And I think what we do for customers like these is, look, they have some of the largest fleets in the world, and there's a plethora there's really an explosion of technology around connected, vehicles that's sending a bunch of data their way. There's a huge amount of capabilities available for everything from damage management to insurance and risk reduction. The problem is that each of these technologies sits in a silo, right? So you're getting data from Ford and GM, and Denso and Continental and Geotab, and all of that is going into your cloud. But how do you take that data and actually help it make it possible for somebody who is sitting in Pensacola, Florida, to find the right vehicle to rent to UPS? How do you make it possible so that if your vehicles are coming off lease, you can apply the circular economy logic, and maybe you don't have enough vehicles of a particular kind available in the supply chain right now. You can find the right vehicle in the right country if you're Arval, and do all of the things necessary, to manage the vehicle lifecycle. And so RideCell really enables internal development teams and operations teams to integrate these 3 or 4 core pillars of technology, and essentially be able to manage these fleets, their entire fleet as a single portfolio, reducing costs, increasing utilization or yield, and then going down to the edge, where I think we have some overlap with folks like Quadric, leverage the data coming straight off of the vehicle, instead of just adding more boxes. So we are really the umbrella system that helps the internal development teams and the operations teams take advantage of the existing technology investments and drive outcomes faster and for less money than they would otherwise have to do internally.
Thanks, Arjav. That's very helpful. We'll come back to you and pick up on a couple of points you've made there, but let's bring in Virbhad from Quadric. So Tony, do you mind doing the honors again and explaining the strategic rationale behind the investment?
Yeah, definitely. So probably everyone on this call has some relation or interest in mobility. And if you're talking about the future of mobility, you can't ignore the roadmap to autonomy. And autonomous vehicles will definitely be a part of our future. And there's, how do we get there? And this has been a bit of a conundrum for Denso and for our auto customers. Compute is a huge part of that problem, and being able to deliver efficient, low power compute with very low latency is something that has to happen in order for us to advance down the autonomous road. And that led us over multiple years to look at numerous different startups that were working in the advanced semiconductor area, sometimes referred to as AI chips. And we came across Quadric and were very impressed with their approach on how to solve certain problems within the compute industry. And we think that there's numerous applications for us using their technology, as well as for our customers to use their technology. So we've been involved with Quadric now for just over 4 years. And again, actively working together, trying to push forward using their technology, providing them with guidance on things that they're going to need to be able to do in the automotive industry, and then figuring out pathways to deploy.
Great. So Virbhad, that's your cue. Please tell us a bit more about Quadric, what you're up to.
Thank you, Tony. Hi, I'm Virbhad Ketterpal, CEO, co-founder of Quadric. The company is about 5 years old, and we started this mission of getting fast low power compute in every device, and that mission accelerated over the past 2.5 years by the need for AI in every device, right? Your ADAS or drive assist system, specifically talking about automotive, uses a lot of AI algorithms, vision processing, and that needs to happen in real time. A car is moving at 40, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, making good decisions, improving safety of these vehicles is all about getting fast processing done on the vehicle. There's no time to send data to the cloud. And so that's where we come in. We have built a new processor architecture and a related software stack, what we call the compiler tool chain, for developers to be able to compile AI algorithms, benchmark them, and then deploy them on our processors. And our business model is kind of like ARM's business model, which is where we license our processor core and distribute our software directly to developers to be able to develop code on this processor. So our mission is, AI, whether generative or not, getting deployed everywhere in your TV, in your phone, in your automotive, all running on the heart of that processing is happening on our cores, which are present in every chip.
Okay, so the automotive industry is just one of your client areas, is that right?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it's one of the biggest ones, I would say. And like what Tony said, right? With a platform like ours and a early stage company, it's super meaningful to get an early adopter, early believer like Denso behind us to back us. It brings a lot of credibility. Denso has the right technical people to be able to look at a company that is, 15 people, that's what we were about 4 years ago, and be able to make that call. That's not a very easy call to make among, a sea of startups. Like when we started in this domain of edge AI or AI chips, I remember tracking more than 70 companies in 2017, 2018 timeframe. So, and there's definitely thinned out quite a bit now since things are getting mature, platforms are getting locked in, things have changed. However, talking about that time frame, they really had the expertise to actually sift through those and make that call.
Okay, but why have you chosen to prioritize automotive? Some companies would regard it as a very conservative industry, which is a fair comment. Very, very focused on safety, perhaps a quite slow technology adoption cycles, even with a corporate venture capital partner on board. So what's behind that decision?
Two things. One is the application of AI going into vision processing on vehicles is slated to be a very big market. It's a non-trivial from a addressable TAM on a company like ours to ignore, right? And having found an early partner like Denso, it makes it easy for us, right? We're not partnering with Denso and the right teams there. We have to worry less as Quadric. We have to worry less about the aspects of the automotive industry, specifically around, safety certifications, ISO standards, where we don't have to completely adopt those and deliver on those. We get help from our strategic partner like Denso to get that done. So from our standpoint, we build the base technology, which is applicable everywhere. The specialization of this technology to automotive is done through a partnership with Denso. So at which point it does even become tractable for us.
Got it. Okay. So that's a real help on the kind of route to market, route to customer there.
Correct.
I also want to pin you both down, or at least start talking about the kind of the question about how close we are to this vision, the vision that was first kind of propagated, I think 2016, 2017 of full autonomy. Is that something that's still years away? Can you tell us, I think in our preparatory call for this, you spoke about some of the work that you're already being able to offer or facilitate autonomous transport. I'm curious as to to hear your views on and yours, Tony, as well, and yours, Arjav, on how close we are to that.
When you say autonomy, right, it's a pretty loaded word. It means a lot of things. So the car I drove this morning had a certain level of autonomy already shipping since last year or 2 years ago when I got the car. And it's pretty impressive what's already shipping in terms of what we call ADAS, right? Level 2 ADAS. And some of the higher end vehicles that are shipping today have even more level 3 functionality. And so if you look at that entire spectrum, 5 years ago when we started, we started talking to Denso, those platforms were picked on top of which ADAS or level 2 is already shipping today, right? It's happening, it's on the road, many vehicles. I'm not talking the $200,000, luxury car. I'm talking, an everyday vehicle already shipping that. And then the road to level 3, 4, 5, we've all seen demos from pretty much every OEM on what the vehicles are capable of, right? And so the industry is going to work through the safety issues one generation at a time, and it is happening, right? It's a matter of time, but a fully autonomous vehicle, the ones that we've seen in, the sci-fi movies out there, is definitely coming. It's hard to put a timeline on when can you just come in, and walk into a car and no steering wheel at all, commonly available for everyone. It's hard to put a timeline on that, but given 23, the vehicle shipping in 27, about 4 years from now, will be even more advanced, and the one in 30, 2030, 31, even more. And so it's going to get better and better until we attain that full level of autonomy.
Great, thank you. Arjav, did you want to come in?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, last week I rode in a cruise vehicle that had no driver in San Francisco, and that was a great moment. But I think we, as an industry, and I think in some measures, sort of complicit with our friends in the press, we are definitely somewhat guilty of creating more hype. And I think in the process, what gets lost is that autonomy is not binary, right? As Vivan points out, one of the reasons I started RideShell is I couldn't get a driving license for 3 years in Atlanta after 5 tests because I was a bad driver. And so I'm very thankful for the advanced driver system in my car because I have an 8-year-old now. And I think that both from the personal level, at the personal level with these advanced, braking systems, advanced driver assistance systems that do increase safety, all the way to at the fleet level where, anyone that has even Mobileye in the vehicles, we work with an OEM and we have data from about 50,000 of their vehicles, that RideShell is able to use to help the fleet, get better data when there's an accident without even sending an insurance inspector out to look at it. So our vehicles, thanks to the spectrum, right, of autonomy, are now equipped with ADAS sensors, even LiDARs, but certainly things like Mobileye, where the data can be very useful to both individuals and to fleets in reducing the cost and the expense related with risk. And I think that as long as we don't look at this as a 0 or 1, and we work as an industry to take advantage of each generation, like Vivan points out, I think there's very much a there already. And so I think I'm excited to see self-driving vehicles everywhere. I don't know that shared self-driving vehicles will ever make sense in suburban Atlanta, but I do think that certainly that it's not a 0 or 1, and I think we are well on the path, maybe more than halfway there, to beginning to sort of start getting the value around these vehicles.
Okay, thanks. Plenty to think about there. I mean, to me, it sounds like perhaps the policy makers are running a bit more slowly than the actual technology providers. I've got a bit of catching up to do, but perhaps that's to be expected. Keen to now move over to the topic of electrification, or at least electrification and sustainability. So I'm just curious, the fleets you're working with at RideShell, the customers you have at Quadric, I imagine, are they predominantly still internal combustion engine customers? You're still dealing with that world, so to speak, or are you working more actively with electric fleets? Virban, do you want to have a go at that first?
Sure. So Tony can tell a more colorful story here, but we definitely saw past 2 years electrification taking lead or being prioritized more on roadmaps everywhere when compared to ADAS, right? That's 2018, 2019. There's a lot of excitement on autonomy, self-driving vehicles. Everyone's expectations kind of got ahead of what was possible in a matter of 3 years, right? And then 21, 22, we've seen massive, reshuffle of roadmaps saying everything gets electrified first, and then, all the ADAS features start to ship on top of that. The base architecture of the vehicle is getting heavily prioritized everywhere. This is a way we're not turning back from at this point. Tony can give us more color there, obviously.
Tony, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, well, I think the previous question around autonomy and this question around electrification are linked in a way that when you look at what the auto OEMs have an amount of money to spend on and where that spend is going. And I think there was a lot of money spent between 2015 to 2019 on advanced ADAS systems on what looked like to be a fairly big roadmap to full autonomy. And you had several CEOs mentioning that. I think that there has been, as Virban pointed out, a huge jump up in announcements over the last 3 years around entire automaker fleets being electrified by 2030, by 2035. So that's led to a spend that is required in order to meet those announced deadlines. And I think what we've seen is a slowdown then in autonomous spending, where incremental improvements to ADAS systems will definitely be still on every automaker's roadmap. And we need to be supporting that. And startups should be thinking about how they can play into that roadmap. But a great bulk of the spending will be on electrification. And that's not just on the automaker side, that's also at a societal level, because obviously we have infrastructure things that need to change in order to support huge uptick in consumer purchases of electric vehicles. In the case of RideCell's world, larger fleets of electric vehicles potentially. How do you have the infrastructure in place to support that? So I think the society in multiple countries now are sort of rethinking about how we get to the electric future, and that's coming within the next 7 to 10 years. And autonomy will lag behind that because autonomy is also going to require a big spend. As you mentioned, Tom, it's going to require new regulations. It's going to require potentially integration with different technologies in cities itself, on roads. So there's a different level of spend that's associated with that. But I think electrification certainly has jumped to the forefront in terms of industry spend right now.
On that note, I noticed that Denso hasn't yet announced any investment in your electrification sort of category. That's not a criticism. I'm just curious if that's something you're expecting to do soon. Some of the sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, actually, we did. Actually, pre-COVID, we announced $1 billion expansion to one of our plants in Tennessee. That was purely for supporting our customers in North America with electrification.
Okay.
So we've definitely gone down that road of we're starting to make investments that will alter how our factories operate, will alter the mix of parts that we support. And as a tier one, it's a little more difficult because now you have a mix of ICE and EV, and you're running similar parts, but for 2 different platforms. But that's the nature of our business when you face this kind of a quite large disruption. And we certainly have embraced the future of EV. I saw a question pop up about hydrogen. Yeah, that's the other thing that is certainly something that the industry has to consider. I hope it doesn't go into like the old VHS versus Betamax tape battle. And I know I'm dating myself by mentioning that as an example, but I lived through it. But there's certainly that possibility because there's lots of benefits for hydrogen as the EV platform, and there are other benefits that are there for plug-in battery platforms. I don't think we've sorted that out quite yet.
So Denso is still open to hydrogen. I mean, there is some of the OEMs or some of the commentariat around the OEMs, I think, are a bit down on hydrogen, but that's something that's still of interest.
Well, I think we have to just be nimble and flexible around what may end up happening. So we I think continually ask ourselves, for certain parts of the mobility industry, hydrogen seems to be a better solution, right? Delivery trucks, heavy duty trucks. It's proven to be safe. Toyota obviously has spent a lot of money demonstrating that their Mirai car is safe and functions very well. So I wouldn't say hydrogen is dead. It hasn't lost yet, but there's certainly I think going to be money spent on both sides of those platforms to figure out where they might be applicable and where it might be the best fit. I think there's certainly areas around sustainability that call into question whether going down the battery road for the entire globe is the right way to go.
Okay, interesting. Coming back to Virban and Arjav, keen to get a sense of the competitive landscape here and who your competitors are. For a non-specialist, reviewing the rapid progress of generative AI, perhaps you might conclude that there's going to be a whole new group of competitors for you, or indeed that some of the proprietary technology you have could become outdated, or it might be more difficult to sustain your competitive advantage. Could you talk to that?
So I think I think specifically with reference to AI, it has been fantastic in the last couple of months. After I got access to the OpenAI API, I've rediscovered my passion for writing code. So I've played around a lot, and we've built some great, tiny tools. And I think I think at this point we are sort of like the early 90s in the internet, right? So my opinion is probably as much as as I'm getting paid for it. But I think that the interesting situation with AI, and my personal belief is that AI will essentially help speed up both the breadth and the pace at which we can do software development. And in that sense, I think it's certainly going to be disruptive, but it'll actually help those companies that are adopting it, go faster, both large companies and startups. And specifically as relates to RideCell, look, our ultimately, if you think about sustainability, our differentiator is that we can deploy our software at the edge and in the cloud, and working very closely with the OEMs, with the tier ones, to do unique things such as shut down idling vehicles, ICE vehicles, based on a configurable threshold. And I think those things are not, I think anyone who has created an ecosystem of partners, with whom they can deploy sort of technologies that are differentiated, is probably going to benefit from AI rather than be disrupted by it. But I think in general, it is fair to say that it will lower the threshold of both expense and time that it takes to build, general purpose technology, workflow management stuff. And I think that net that's good for society, right? I think software is moving faster to help the world. I think that's a net good for society. So we don't believe that this will be hugely disruptive for us. In fact, we think it will most likely be a tailwind. But I do think that that each company should look at it at the technology and see how it affects their own business.
Virbhan, your views on this?
Yeah, I'll make a quick comment here. When we started Quadric a few years ago, this is something that Denso really appreciated in our approach. Was we recognized that it was too early, too early days in AI. I'm talking 2018, 2017 timeframe, to be able to design hardware that's locked to certain types of AI algorithms. So we designed from day one. We always designed something that we market today as the GP NPU, very much like how NVIDIA created graphics processing units and then made them general purpose. So they call the GPUs. We created the general purpose neural processing unit, which means it's general purpose by design. And so these last 6 months of more use cases emerging around generative AI actually align pretty well with what we already have. And 80% of our investments, 80% of our employees here work in software. That's where most of the bottlenecks are with respect to AI and compilers. And the wave of generative AI, effectively what it's doing is it's creating more demand for the need for AI specific processing in everything, because your general purpose CPUs and GPUs are not quite suited to do these types of algorithms fast enough with power efficiency that's required across all devices. So it's actually a really good thing for us, specifically talking about Quadric, where the AI moved from specific vision processing or finding people in a camera or identifying objects to this generative use case of generating content and helping people be more productive across PowerPoint, email, documents, and much more. Super exciting what's going on.
Great. Excellent. Yeah, very exciting, very confusing for some of us as well, even a bit worrying. I want to sort of switch tacks a little bit and talk about, Tony, some of your exits from your portfolio. What exits have you had? Because I think that would be a useful place for us to start a conversation about what it exits we might anticipate in the future? Who are going to be the buyers? Will it be companies like Denso? Will it be the automotive companies themselves? Or will it be other parts of the overall supply chain? But on that first question, so yeah, Tony, could you tell us a bit about the exits you've had?
Yeah, so we've had a couple companies go, achieve an IPO. We've had a couple companies get bought. We have had 2 companies now enter into SPAC partnerships. So I'll be interested to see if those progress to actually get to a D-SPAC. I think it's interesting. I think since COVID hit, there's been a sort of a rise in potential exit opportunities. I think we've had a little bit of a decrease in M&A activity over the last 12 months. Obviously, the global economic uncertainty, high inflation, collapse of SVB, those sorts of things, I think have layoffs for a lot of the tech companies and other companies as well. There's I think a little bit of uncertainty about how to achieve growth, and cost cutting seems to be a bit more of the norm over the last 10 months. Certainly, if the economy turns around later this year, early next year, I think mergers and acquisitions come back as certainly a potential exit for many of the startup companies. I know Denso will certainly have an appetite for that. We haven't been historically super aggressive in that area, but we do definitely like to pick and choose where we think we can get strategic value based on an acquisition, and we do look globally for those as well. So I think we've had a bit of a through COVID and now through this economic uncertainty area over the last 12 months. It's more been about supporting our portfolio companies, making sure that they have healthy cash available on their balance sheets, that they're operating the right way and moving forward with their technology development. And in my mind, exits sort of sort themselves out over time. I think it's difficult and sometimes in the automotive mobility industries just because it's a long path to growth and to deployment. And so you need to have a bit of patience. Luckily, I work for a Japanese corporation that has quite a bit of patience. But I think I think we're in for an upturn in overall exit environment in the next hopefully 10 to 15 months.
Okay, here's a question for you, an interesting one. What are you not looking to invest in at the moment? Or perhaps an easier way of putting that question is, are there some sectors? I remember one of the portfolio companies of yours that presented back in 2017, I think, a LiDAR technology business, a Trilumina, that's exited. Do you think that LiDAR now is kind of, we've seen the innovation that we're going to see, or do you expect more innovations in that area? I'm just trying to get a sense of what is kind of done and what is still to be done.
Well, I think it's a good question, and I think I would answer that by saying, kind of in bulk. So computer vision, right? I mean, if you asked me 5 years ago about LiDAR, I would have said there's 60 plus startups globally working on LiDAR. In advanced, next generation radar, there are at least 20 startups that we are tracking. Plenty of other companies working on infrared, working on camera-based technologies. So the overall computer vision sector, I would say, has seen the high point. And you may get a new startup that comes up with something truly disruptive, but I don't think you're going to see 60 more LiDAR startups launched. You're not going to see 20 more radar startups launched, because I think it'd be difficult for investors to support that. Yeah, could you see 2 or 3 that believe that they have something truly disruptive? Yeah, that's the nature of the startup ecosystem. That there are still brilliant ideas out there, and those ideas will be pursued by investors that believe that the startup has found something truly unique. So we're not interested, I think, anymore in looking at computer vision. I think there's still things that can be done in compute, and some of the startups that are working on it still have things to prove out there. Certainly, as I mentioned, some of the other areas that are now new to us. So wellness in a vehicle, what does that mean, right? And how do you deliver that? There are things that are scent based, right? So trying to get rid of scents in shared vehicles, or using scent as a way to calm people down. The in-cabin experience, I think, is going to change dramatically over the next 10 to 15 years. So that's certainly an area of interest to us. We've had sort of a renewed interest. Maybe the second wave of smart city technologies will start rising here in the next 5 years, and we think there'll be lots of interesting startups in that area, because again, having to try to achieve a roadmap to autonomy means cities are going to need to change how their infrastructure operates, how it interacts with vehicles. Roadside units may be required, and Denso's gotten into that business already. So I think there are lots of interesting areas, but some areas, as I mentioned, have already sort of been played out in our mind.
Interesting. So coming back to Virban and Arjav, curious to talk a bit more about your companies and where you are in your journey. What type of growth pains are you suffering from? How are you managing them? Are you finding it difficult to hire people? That's a bit of a problem in various parts of the world. Are you having problems with your own supply chain? Yeah, I get the impression that you're both growing fast. So how are you managing that? And what problems do you have? Arjav, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I think, look, we've always been, conscious about sort of making sure growth is sustainable. I think to reference the earlier question you asked, Tony, as Tony knows, we actually chose not to go SPAC, because the valuation we were being offered was something like 5 times our last round valuation, and it was too good to be true. And I think that I mentioned that in reference to this question, because I think not making that choice has enabled us to, focus on the core, and we grew, 5x last year in terms of scale, and we are on track to grow another 3x this year. So while, we have also been able to, build our R&D base, not just in the United States, but in Europe, which is even more important. Half of our revenue is Europe and in India. And I think that, so for us right now, touch wood, partly because, we right now are almost counter-cyclical. We're helping our customers significantly reduce their costs, increase sustainability. We are seeing, growth continuing. And the last few years have taught us that, you can never take anything for granted. But I think the main challenges for us right now are around execution, right? Which for any startup is by far, the most important thing, to do well so that our customers can succeed. And at the moment, we're not finding hiring hard. We're not really finding anything, just scaling in a way that is sustainable from, a financial perspective and a customer-centric perspective. And that's a challenge that we enjoy solving.
Okay. Virban?
So I've been through 2 other startups before this one. I was a co-founder of the others as well. Both of those startups were acquired. This one definitely has been very unique. And every day that I wake up, I'm glad I'm not hearing, a bank blow up or a global pandemic started, right? We navigated this company through the pandemic, and then, this overhyped, overinvestment cycle, and then the crash we're all seeing right now from that, right? The cool off. And then the SVB incident, right? Certainly has been quite a roller coaster. And but like Arjav said, we've been focused on getting a sustainable way to cash flow break even point. Since we're a platform and IP licensing model, we tend to have good exit multiples, high free cash flow from a pure, business metric standpoint, right? And so the path, even through this difficult environment, towards getting to a free cash flow break even point, it's clear, and we're executing on it. And we have seen a big change in our ability as a small startup to hire now and get good talent versus 2 years ago. 2021 was super different in the environment when we were out trying to get the right kind of software talent versus today is very different. So certainly, certain things have got a lot better for us, from a team building standpoint, from a, less competition. Like I said, we had 70 or more computer vision startups in embedded AI space back 5 years ago, and that has thinned out a lot. And the race is towards what we're doing is sort of tends to be a winner take all model, like ARM or other processor companies that are there today. And so a handful of us are moving forward, and the race is on for the top two that will dominate this space.
Okay, just curious about the licensing business model you have. Was that something that your customers readily accepted? Did they push back on that a bit?
No, that's a great question. It tends to be a natural fit for a technology like ours. If you look at the edge, right, there's more than 400 different chips that ship. Different one for your TV, different one for your phone, and Automotive have 30 different variants, and every camera has their own chip, right? And so with that ecosystem of edge chips and OEMs and partners that have those verticals, licensing the processor core tends to be a natural for that industry. They've been doing it with ARM. They have well-established ways where they acquire the licenses and put it in their chips. And the great thing about that is it's a very software-driven play where you get yourself embedded in many chips, and you get the network effect of software being used by developers. And that's why earlier I mentioned it tends to be a winner-take-all model. So in a few years from now, there will be an ARM-like company that's providing AI cores for everyone in the embedded space, and their software and tool chain will be dominating that space. And we're basically gearing up to be that.
Excellent. That's a very bold, impressive, and ambitious statement. Wish you luck with that. Sounds like you're in a strong position to get there. Arjav, just coming back to you, you referred to your presence in India. Just curious as to whether you think India and other perhaps emerging markets, Southeast Asia in particular, are going to be, how big they're going to be for you as a customer basis, or will you think that your growth will mostly come from North America?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Look, I think right now, our revenues come, roughly 45% from, Europe and North America. But I think both LATAM and India in particular, and within Asia, are very interesting for us, along with Japan. And I think what is, I was born in India, so I'm an optimist about India, sort of almost as a bias. But if you look at India and EVs, to pick one topic, I was fairly skeptical that EVs would, be able to grow in India very fast, just because of the high upfront cost of investment, the charging network. And what has been fascinating, and I'm very thankful to have been proven wrong, is that in the last 3 years, not only did EVs grow in India, driven by the high cost of gas prices, and electrification really, accelerating very, very fast. But an OEM like Tata, which is a fantastic company, but was able to ride that wave to go from being in the last quartile to being the top quartile. And so I do think that I think the dynamics around these emerging markets, India in particular, of the fact that the so-called middle class of India, right, which is the white collar workers, is now larger than the US population and continues to grow. And I think the speed with which some of the larger players can move certainly makes it a very attractive sort of market for us. I think each market, mobility has very universal pillars, but it's very local in how it is implemented and succeeds. And so I think each market, including India, you need to go and you need to find the right way to go to market. I would say we are still starting out doing that in India, and we want to invest in any market where we scale. We want to make sure that we have the right ability to support our customers. So India is definitely near the top of that list, along with LATAM.
Okay, thank you for that. Just reading the note, so we are coming to the end of this discussion, and so I should draw us to a bit of a conclusion. So firstly, I want to thank everyone. I think we've got into some quite significant depth. One of the benefits of a webinar format over a regular conference format is you get a bit more time, and I think I've certainly enjoyed Virban, your comments, and Ajav, your comments and your descriptions of your businesses. Very exciting indeed. Tony, thank you very much for introducing them. I should point us towards our next opportunity to meet in real life, which will be at the GCV Symposium in London, and very important date in your diary, June 20th and 22nd. Tony will be flying over from California to London, and we will be organising for him, but not exclusively for him, a discreet London pub crawl, which you are all very welcome to join. It'll be relatively civilized, in the sense that obviously we'll be very busy at work next day at the conference itself. I can reveal exclusively that Tony has a particular predilection for Boddington beer, which I don't share myself, but nevertheless that will feature on the menu, but there'll be other drinks available, and there will be, of course, no driving. That will be a walking pub crawl, to which you are all invited. You can see other events on the calendar, and then the next webinar in this series, actually it's not focused on a particular industry, it's more about the industry of, indeed, corporate venturing, for those of you that are keen to advance your careers here, and that will be led by GCV's own institute, GCV Institute. Please do get in touch. Those are my contact details. We didn't get through to answer all of the questions, but I hope we covered some. Remains for me to say thank you very much for your time. Thanks again, Denso. Look forward to seeing you again soon, and have a safe travel home or to work today.